Hi there, I'm going to show you how you can create a sample of a vent pleat. This is often found in the back of a skirt, or it could be the back of a jacket, and the way this works is that the pleat is formed on the inside, and it's kept held in position by this permanent stitching here, but is free to open here on the back of the garment just to allow ease of movement and walking. So for example in a skirt that would allow you to walk more freely. And the inside looks like this, so this part of the fabric here is forming the pleat. To create your sample of the vent pleat, you'll need to have this pattern, which you'll need to cut out, and then you'll need to cut out 2 pieces in fabric using that pattern. So I've done that already, and now you'll need to transfer your markings that are on there. So the pattern gives you some clue as to what to do there. So on my paper instructions here it says snip, so I'm going to put a small snip at the bottom of this seam line here, and at the top it says snip, and I'm going to put a small snip there at the top of the seam line there as well. So just put in a tiny snip, so about 1/2 centimetre long. You don't want to cut much further than that because this is going to be into your seam allowance, so it's just to mark where that line is. And then also I need to mark this point here, and the pattern says tailor's tack, so you could do that, transfer that mark with a tailor's tack, or you could use a pen that disappears, or anything that's going to be able to come out, or chalk or something. I'll use a tailor's tack, so I've threaded up my needle with a single strand but doubled it together. I haven't put a knot in the end, and I'm using a colour that's completely different to the colour of my fabric, so it's going to stand out. And I just put my pin through the pattern and pull that till I've got a tuft of thread left on there, and then if I turn that over I'm going to come back through the pattern exactly through the fabric and back through the pattern in exactly the same place, and I just want to leave a loop of thread on the back there, and then I can cut that. So I've transferred the 2 snips top and bottom, and I've transferred the tailor's tack marking there, so I can take the pins out and remove the pattern. And then just gently pull the paper pattern away, and then I need to separate these 2 pieces of fabric, so I can open those up gently and then just cut there. So what I need to do is to edge finish along this edge here. Now you could do that with separately, so each piece will be edge finished. I could do that with the overlocker, or I could just do it with the pinking shears. So for the purpose of this sample I'm just going to use pinking shears to pink along the edges, and I'm going to do that at the end. If I was actually making a garment I would probably use the overlocker and overlock along these edges all the way down, and there's techniques that you can use to go around the inside corner here and also the outside corner, which I'll show on another video. So I'm going to put these 2 pieces together, do all the edge finishing later, and I'm going to stitch from the top there, from that snip up to that point there, using a normal length straight machine stitch, and then from here to the bottom I'm going to use a long machine stitch. And the reason I've done that, the reason I'm going to do that is because I want to take this long stitching out later, but I want to keep it in until I have finished the sample and pressed it all in the right place. So I'm just going to put a couple of pins in to hold these pieces together until I have finished the stitching. I'm going to begin stitching from the snip at the top of my sample, which is 1.5 centimetres or 15mm from the raw edge. So I'm actually following the 15 line on the needle plate. So for this top part I'm using a regular length stitch, so 2.5. I'll just take the pin out as I come to it. So following the 15 line and then heading towards the tailor's tack there. So you can use the hand wheel or just stop exactly when you get to that tailor's tack. And then once I get to that tailor's tack, I'm going to just go backwards and forwards to secure those stitches. Leave the needle in, and then I'm going to turn up my stitch length to the longest stitch length that I can do here. So I've just turned this up to 4, and then I'm going to do a long machine stitch heading towards the snip in the bottom here. And I don't need to do any back tacking at that point, I just need to stop because these stitches will come out later. The next thing I need to do is to reinforce the inner corner and the upper edge of this vent. So I'm just going to stitch again over the stitch line here, starting about 2 centimetres, 2.5 centimetres away from my tailor's tack or this pivot point, and then starting from here, stitching to the tailor's tack, pivoting and stitching along the top of this vent opening. So I'm going to turn the stitch length back down to 2.5 before I start, because I don't want to be doing that with a long stitch, and I just need to reposition myself over the stitches there, starting from here. So I can go backwards and forwards to secure the stitches, stitch to the tailor's tack, use the hand wheel to make sure I'm exactly in the right position, pivot that, and then stitch across the top here. And then reverse again at the end, so that's secure. My seam allowance on here is about 2 centimetres, so usually on a pattern it would be 1.5 centimetres. But I've just followed that and kept that straight from this point here. So I've stitched the seam to here, done a long machine stitch to the bottom, and then I've reinforced starting from this point here where you can see the thread, reinforcing from here to the tailor's tack and then stitching the top of that vent pleat closed. What I can do next is to take out the tailor's tack because I don't need that anymore, and then I'm going to just cut the threads here, take the tailor's tack out from the back, cut the threads, seem to have a bit of a knot there, so that's fine, just trim that off. Then I need to press the sample flat, so this vent pleat will sit to one side, and there's a bit of an issue here. If I open this up and try and press this flat, I want to be able to press this seam open along the top here and press the vent pleat to one side, but at the moment if I press that way I can't press this open, so I'm going to just cut into this upper layer of fabric, so I'm only cutting through the top layer here, not both of them, and I'm going to snip up to that point there, which is why I've reinforced the stitching here so that I can cut up to that point and it's not a problem. So you can see I have only cut the top layer, the bottom layer is still intact, there is no cut here, so do only cut through one layer. Then I'm going to open this up, I'm going to press the vent pleat to the right hand side, pressing that flat, and I'm going to press the seam flat and open above that. So at this stage what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just quickly pink the edges of my sample before I then do the pressing. So as I said, you could do this edge finishing at the beginning, and you could use the overlocker, or you could zigzag the edges. Obviously if you're going to overlock, you need to do it before you start the sewing because it's much easier. Okay, so all the edge finishing's done, and I'm just going to go over to the iron and press that sample flat. So I'm over on the ironing board, and I'm going to just press this seam open here at the top, and then press the vent pleat to one side. So I want to make sure, first of all, just make sure before you even start ironing that you're using the correct heat for your fabric. That's one of my favourite techniques of burning the samples as I go, so please avoid doing that. And then just check from the right side that that is pressed over, because you can sometimes end up with a slight ridge from the right side, so I do want that to be as flat as possible there. Okay, so that's that pressing part of the sample done. So when this sample's finished, I'm going to have a visible line of stitching from the right side of the fabric, which will be diagonally across here, and it will hold the vent pleat in position, and it will allow this pleat to open. So I need to have something to use as a guide. So I've just threaded up a needle in a contrasting colour, and I'm just going to run some hand stitching along that same line of stitching here. So following the line across the top of the vent opening, just going to run some stitching along here. So that from the right side I can see where I need to stitch. I want to make sure I stitch from the right side and not do it at this stage from the wrong side, because I can end up going too far over the opening here. So it is much easier to do from the right side. So on the machine I want to stitch from this point to this point, and I want to finish exactly on that stitch line. So I shall start stitching from this far point here and then finish at the seam, and again stitching with a normal length stitch. So starting from that point there where my tailor's where my hand stitching finishes. So going backwards and forwards at that point to secure my stitching, following that hand tack in right up to the seam line, and using the hand wheel to make sure that I finish exactly on the seam line there, which you can see that that's right on that point. And then just back tacking to secure the stitches, and that's done. So you can see my line of stitching there. Now that line of machine stitching is done, I can now cut the threads of the machine stitching. From both sides. And then I can take out the hand tacking that's there. And the last stage is to just remove the tacking along this edge here. And then just remove any stitching from inside that fold line. And that's the vent pleat from the right side. So that's the sample finished, and I just need to go around the edge with the pinking shears to finish off the sample. So that's my vent pleat sample finished, and that's ready to go into my file.